I was born in Braunschweig, Germany. Braunschweig is a town, it's not really small, but it's not really big either. It's between Hanover and Magdeburg. If you would go from Hanover to Magdeburg and then to Berlin, you would have to go through Braunschweig.
Okay.
And our town is famous for liverwurst. That's what was ever made first. My mother was a housewife, my father was a teacher, and later on a principal of a school. Well, see, at that time, I don't know if they still do that in Germany now, but at that time, a teacher got kids in first grade and kept them for 4 years. They had no other teacher but him for 4 years, and that's the way it always was. He got a new class, for 4 years he has them, and then he got a new class, so that's what he taught.
Okay.
And he had to, and in order to become a teacher in Germany, you had to be able to play the piano and play the violin. Because at that time, when my father became a teacher, he might be sent to a small country school where there was a one-room schoolhouse where he had to be the teacher, the gym teacher, and the music teacher. So he knew how to play violin and piano.
That's cool.
The divorce for us from Germany started in 1939, and I was born in 1928. So I was 10 years old. No, yeah, 11. I'm not so good at math. No, I was born in, I was born in Braunschweig, but my father had a teaching job, his very first teaching job, in a real little farmer town. The name of it was Rühen. And it was right on the, after the war, right on the border of the Americans and the Russians. And that's where we lived when I was real tiny. And then later, after that, I lived in Braunschweig. At home, I don't remember exactly what happened, but all I just know is that everybody, Hitler was trying to make it so that everybody had a car. That's how the Volkswagen got started. And also, everybody had a radio, which was a Volksradio. There was a small one, and there was a medium-sized one, and a big one. We had the medium-sized one. And it came over the radio. I don't remember exactly what I was doing or anything, but
okay.
all I know is that I think the week before the war started, my father got drafted. And because he was a teacher and he could learn things quickly, they made him a weatherman. He was a meteorologist, he had to learn how to do that. And before planes were allowed to take off, they had to go to because they didn't have any radar then. So he had to go to the weather bureau. They had to go and he had to give them the weather, and if somebody flew into a mountain, it was my father's fault, not the pilot's fault. So, so he was a weatherman all through the war. He was all through the war. He worked on the airport. For a little while, he was stationed in Italy, but not for very long. And then he came back home because my mother got really sick and almost died, and he called him back home again. And just before the war was over with for us, they transferred him to Hamburg. And they told him that he would have to be trained on how to shoot a gun and how to shoot a bazooka in case when the Americans came to defend this airport. Because he'd never been trained on that. He just was trained to become a weatherman, a meteorologist. So he left. We took him to the train station, and his buddies kept saying, don't go, just take the wrong train, or say you took a train and the tracks were all broken. But my father was a very honorable man. He had that order to go, so he went. And when he got to Hamburg, they took all their uniforms away, because he was an officer. they took all their uniforms away and made them infantrymen, gave them all dirty, busted infantry uniforms with holes in them and everything, and shipped them to Berlin to defend Berlin against the Russians. And that's the last time we ever heard from him. So, you don't know, I'm sure he was born in 1901, so I'm sure he's dead now. So I don't know where he died, how he died, where he's buried. I have no idea. Nobody does. My cousin was going to be drafted into the army. So my uncle, my aunt, and my cousin decided we were going to have a going away dinner. So my uncle was a editor of our hometown newspaper, so everybody knew him, you know. So we went to this really fancy, fancy restaurant, and we had a wonderful dinner. And my mother said, I have to go to the ladies' room. She said to me, you want to come with me? Yeah, I said, why not? So the two of us went out to the ladies' room, but she didn't want to go to the ladies' room. She went to the person who owned the restaurant and said, have you heard any 4 alarms? A 4 alarm was when the planes flew into Germany, then they had 3 long toots, like, ooh, you know. Mm-hmm. And then when they came close enough, then they had the main alarm, which was up and down, the toot, you know, the siren. And then after, when the area was over with, they had one long siren toot. That was the, so the guy said, yeah, we had just now a thing saying that there was going to be a 4 alarm in a little while. So my mother said, come on, we're leaving. I said, aren't you even going to go say goodbye? She said, no, I'm not going to say goodbye, because if I do, he's going to stop us. My uncle, she meant. Let's go. So we started to go. We went to the trolley car station, and as we were at the station, the 4 alarm started. And everything stopped. The trolley stopped, the buses stopped, the taxis stopped, everything stopped at the 4 alarm. Everybody went into shelters or towards shelters or something. So my mother said to me, come on, we're going to walk. And you mustn't forget, it was a blackout. There was no lights on, none. The cars had, they had some kind of a leather thing that went over their light. They had a little tiny slit in it, barely visible. And she said, come on, we're going to walk. I said, oh, Mom, it's such a long walk. My mother was very ill. She had a very bad heart. She said, we've got to walk because my brother and my little sister were home alone with our maid. And she didn't know if they even, I mean, we didn't know if they were going to drop bombs or not. Mm. So we're walking. And we got to the, well, maybe about an hour's, we had maybe about another 3/4 of an hour to walk to get home. And all of a sudden, a soldier had joined us. There was a barracks close by, and he was afraid he was going to be WOL, you know. And so he said, oh, I'm so worried. And so all of a sudden, they started to set lights in the sky. A light there, a light here, there, and here, like in a square. Mm-hmm. And he said, oh, they're going to drop bombs. My mother said, no, don't be worrying. She said, my husband works at the airport, and that just means that our planes aren't supposed to take off anymore. She hardly had the words out when bombs came down. So she threw me against the wall of the house, and she threw herself on top of me. And then as soon as the first bombs had all fallen, she grabbed me and we went into the basement of this house. And it was one of those kind of basements where the ceiling was like right above your head. It was not a very deep basement. And all the people were all screaming and crying and carrying on. And I started to cry, and my mother pulled my hand and she said, what are you crying about? I said, my mother wasn't crying, so why should I cry? So, but she kept shoving me through the people. The basement was crowded. She kept shoving me towards the chimney because, see, she grew up in Alsace-Lorraine, at in the First World War, and they dropped bombs there in the First World War. Although the planes couldn't fly in very far into Germany, but there they dropped bombs. So she knew from the First World War that the chimney usually stayed standing, you know. Mm-hmm. So she pushed me towards the chimney, and then it was over with, and we got out. Like I said, my mother was very ill, and we had a hand wagon that we had brought into town that our wash was in. That we had brought it to a mangle that make your sheets nice and smooth, you know. So I put her in that wagon, and I started to pull her. And we got just so far, and there was an air raid warden. He says, "I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't let you go any further. We're not allowed to let you go any further because there's bombs all over the place." And she said, "Oh, I have to get home to my little girl and my little boy. I have to get home." And he said, "All right, but remember, you're doing it at your own risk." So I'm pulling her through the dark. It was maybe about, what time was it? Maybe 10:30, 11 o'clock, so around that time. And oh my God, there was one laying over there and one laying over there that I had to walk around it. And they were those incinerator bombs. They were about this long and octagonal, and they were filled with some kind of phosphorus jelly. And when they fell and busted, that jelly would ignite and it would burn, and there was no way you could put that stuff out. The only way you can put it out is to put sand on top of it. Everybody had to have, you had an upstairs, you had to have a bucket of water on the bottom of the stairs and a bucket of sand. Can you imagine having a 3-year-old child with a bucket of water and a bucket of sand? Oh, she used to have a picnic with that. Anyway, so we kept walking, and oh my God, I see one laying there. Talk about getting the willies. My hair was standing on end. And another one over there, and then one was right in the middle of the walk, and I had to pull the wagon around it, and I tried to I was so careful so I wouldn't make it go ignite. I didn't know whether it had a timer in it or not, you know. Anyway, that was a gruesome walk until we got home. We had to walk maybe about 3/4 of an hour to get home. And when we got home, my brother, my sister, and our maid slept through the whole thing. They didn't even hear it. So that was my first experience with ration cards we had from the time the war started. Until I came to this country, we still had ration cards in Germany. And from the time the war started, everything was rationed. Just about everything you can think of that you could buy. Like, if you wanted to buy a pair of shoes, you had to go to the authority and get a slip saying you needed shoes. Or if you wanted to get a bicycle, or bicycle tires, anything. The only thing that was not rationed was salt and vinegar. That was the only thing you could buy without ration cards. Everything was rationed. And the ration cards were made in such a way that young people, like teenagers, would get more meat and things that makes the body grow. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. More things like that. And little babies would get more milk and more butter and more cheese than an adult would. An adult would not get as much different food like that than a teenager would. I had one poor little old aunt. She was so little. God, she was only about this high. And she was an old maid. She never got married. And the ration cards that poor thing used to get. She used to come to visit us just to get a meal, I swear to God. And she would get like, maybe a half a pound of meat for the whole month. And meat means not just stuff you can cook, that also means like liverwurst and salami and the kind of stuff you like for lunch meat. And that was all included. So we didn't get very many meat ration cards because we always killed a pig every year. We lived more in the country than not. Every year we get a little pig and we feed it until around Christmas time. And then we had one man in our whole town that did nothing all his life but butcher pigs for people. We had to make an appointment.